Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. This is part 2 of our Eden project recording, and if you haven't seen part 1, make sure to check that out first, where we talk a bit about the project's ethos and an overview of the many amazing things being done here. Furthermore, this episode is actually a double whammy, where we'll be talking with 2 people about 2 totally different topics: ecology and the challenges facing wildflowers and seeds and genetically, and the topic of energy, about how a piece of rock in Cornwall could potentially provide 20% of the UK's energy. So we're here at the Eden Project today with Fern, who runs a Seedbank for the National Wildflower Centre here at Eden. Yeah. So thank you very much for giving us your time. It's wonderful to meet you in the flesh after so many emails and so long of talking about being able to come down and see things here.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for coming. It's really lovely to have somebody to ask to come and see our work and what we're doing.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting, and it's something I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about, all the work that goes into it, and what's sort of going on behind the scenes. So maybe we could start by talking a bit about the National Wildflower Centre and how it's come here to Eden.
Yeah. So the National Wildflower Centre is actually a visitor attraction that was set up as a Millennium Project. Eden was also a Millennium Project, and the visitor attraction was set up by Landlife, which was a charity all focused around wildflowers. And unfortunately, in 2017, it got into financial difficulty, and Tim Smith knew about Landlife and the National Wildflower Centre and said, we can't let this fold because of the important work that they do. We need to save it. So the National Wildflower Centre came to Eden, and we gained Richard Scott, who is our technical director. And Richard primarily works in inner cities, in Liverpool and Manchester, and putting wildflowers into those landscapes and bringing wildflowers to people in those landscapes that wouldn't normally get to experience them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, yeah, Richard's a really interesting character. So I met Richard a long time ago with Judy Ling Wong, who's also on the podcast. And we went as part of a team to the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi to talk about engaging communities and the sort of different methods that people are using in different mediums. And obviously in Richard's case, it's wildflowers. So, and there's quite a lot of work he's done in Liverpool of sort of bringing them into the city so people can kind of engage with them and things like that, which is really, quite interesting and quite special to bring a bit of life into the city and a bit of colour and seasonality, which is really important.
Yeah, I think Richard really started doing, was like really at the forefront of all that work, 20 years ago, people weren't thinking about wildflowers on road verges and now they are, and they're thinking about those spaces as being habitats, and they're not waste ground. They're places that you can use for people, for plants, for people, and for pollinators. It's the whole thing.
That's it, and they're so important in connecting, spaces, aren't they? Because roads go everywhere, pretty much. So making use of those corridors is really important, and quite often, they are just sort of left or a bit abandoned or just short mown grass or whatever it may be. And there's so much potential to improve them for biodiversity and make them more attractive and all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, we have, in terms of space in the UK that's actually set aside for nature, we've got very little, and we've got very little space in the UK that isn't being used for something. So a lot of people can look, so we're in Cornwall, you might come on holiday to Cornwall and go, wow, it's so green and it's so biodiverse, but actually a lot of that greenery is farmland, and obviously that's necessary. We all eat food. I need somebody to grow my food. But it's not actually doing really anything for nature, and that's obviously changing. There's a lot more new subsidies for farmers and encouragement, and farmers want to do things for nature. They do. It's not that they don't care, but they're running a business and they're on a breadline, and they've got to look after themselves and their families. And so somebody who doesn't know might look at that landscape and say it's green and it's biodiverse, but that's not the case. And that's what I really like about the highways and the roads is that's space that at the moment is not being used. And by being used, I don't mean that you have to go in and dig it up and sow wildflowers. You can manage it. You can do that. If you're in an urban area and you want to make an impact and you want the focus is on people and their experience where they live, then that's fine. But in a rural area, it might just be managing those verges differently to encourage rare species. If you reduce the soil fertility, you get orchids and all sorts of things coming up.
Yeah, that's it. And it just adds, as we were saying, much more interest to it as well. And that's one of the big misconceptions, isn't it, around sort of the rural environment is this green sort of paradise.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, a lot of it's sterile.
Yeah.
A lot of farmland is completely sterile. And there's been some research done. I can't remember who did it now off the top of my head, around sort of housing developments, and actually housing developments over some what we would consider greenfield sites actually can have an increase in biodiversity, which is a real shame in a way, because it would be nice to retain that green space. But if it's not providing for biodiversity as well as it could do, there is kind of a real challenge there. And that's part of what we need to try and review now, is how do we take our current practices and make them more efficient and more effective for all the services and things we want, clean water, clean air, but biodiversity, carbon, and food production as well. We can't forget food production because it's vital, and it's how do we work with those systems to improve them as best we can.
It's interesting what you say about the housing estates, actually. So I'm doing master's degree in biological recording, and that kind of the data that you collect from that is the thing that informs that finding. It's the data that informs that kind of finding. And we've been discussing where you target biological recording, and actually there's not a lot of biological recording done on farmland. But how do you know that you're making gains if you haven't got a baseline to work from? So, yeah,
it's a real challenge. There's so much that needs to be done, but there's so much also going on that you don't necessarily know about. It's kind of a bit of a challenge, really, isn't it? Where you kind of focus your attention on all these things, and there's so many. This is the trouble with a lot of the environmental things that are going on. They're much more complicated than people realise. You think, let's do this over there. But actually, there's so much needs to go into it before that and after that to manage, maintain, monitor. How do you manage all of that?
Yeah.
So what is the kind of work you're involved with in terms of wildflowers and kind of the more rural areas? Because you're doing a lot on sort of genetic variation and all of those types of things too.
Yes, yeah. So the National Wildflower Centre, we've got two arms really. So I've spoken about the work that our technical director is doing up in Liverpool, and the Cornwall arm is myself running the Seedbank and my colleague Steph, who's a project manager. And what we're really focusing on is trying to make local provenance seed available for conservation and restoration work within Cornwall. So there's a lot of places that you can get seed from, get very good seed from, but at the moment a lot of the seed is going to be farmed, and it's coming from the same stock, and a lot of suppliers do go back to the wild stock, but it's very labour intensive. And there is a call for local provenance seed to be used in projects locally, and a lot of people think it can't make much of a difference, if whether the seed's from Scotland or whether it's from Cornwall. But it's not. I don't think necessarily it's specifically where it's from. Though obviously there are seed zones within the UK. The UK is split into seed zones. That's primarily for trees. So Southwest has a seed zone. But the main thing is that you're actually getting wild stock, and the Society of Ecological Restoration says you shouldn't farm more than 5 generations without going back to the wild stock, because every time you're farming seed, you're applying a selection pressure, a non-natural selection pressure. So you're sowing everything at the same time and you're harvesting it at the same time. So you're selecting for everything that has flowered and successfully set seed by that point. And then when you clean the seed, you are putting it through a series of sieves or aspirators. So you're then selecting it by size and weight. So when we sieve, I don't want to sieve out things that are too big, but inevitably you will. You'll lose a few things that are too big to go through the sieve, but the bulk of your seed's there. But then within 5 generations, you could have made that seed quite a bit smaller than it naturally is. And you actually do see that. It's visible to the layman. We had a volunteer working with us to clean some wild carrot that we'd collected, and we'd got some wild carrot that we'd collected from a site that had been sown from a seed packet, and we had wild carrot that had been collected in the wild from the coast path, and he'd collected the sown one first. He'd cleaned the sown one first, and then he was cleaning the wild one, and he said, "Is this the same species? I just want to check." And I said, "Yeah." I checked the labels. I said, "Yeah, it's definitely the same thing." And he said, "Are you sure? They're so different." And I was like, oh, well, it's because this one's cultivated. And he's like, I wouldn't have even thought they were the same species. And it's the same thing with Viper's bugloss. So that naturally is actually quite a small plant. It's very elegant. It's very sweet. And we found a wild patch of it near St Agnes this year, and I was just completely over the moon. It survived in a very, very clean arable field around the margins. But yeah, but when you see, and it's fine, you can pick it by hand. When you see when you get the stuff that's cultivated, it's really tall. It's very, very branched in comparison to the wild stock, and also it's so spiky. So you try and touch that with your bare hands, you'll end up with almost like little cactus-like spines in your fingers that you can't get out.
Right.
And that doesn't occur when you interact with the wild species. So, not that these featural changes. I mean, they don't probably make an awful lot of difference to the pollinator. But in terms of if you are putting and also if you're putting that on a road virgin in a city, that doesn't matter. It benefits people and it benefits the pollinators. But I think when you're going and doing restoration work and you're trying to reintroduce plants into the wild, you want to not be applying selection pressures, and you want to be putting back in what is naturally occurring.
Yeah, definitely. And why is that so important? Because obviously, I know with trees, for example, that genetic variation is incredibly important when it comes to pests and diseases, and sort of tolerances for drought and things like that. And we see it with Chalara, which is what's wiping out ash across Europe at the moment, and the UK. It's hoped that the UK has some of the best diversity of ash in Europe, because we have had more sort of wild species in lots of sort of areas that have been left, or a bit more variation in the stock here than there is in parts of Europe. So it's hoped that there'll be a bit more genetic variation, and because obviously we're in Ireland, things are a bit separate from Europe anyway, and it's hoped there might be a bit more tolerance or some small genetic changes somewhere in the UK that might make ash resilient to this disease. So I'm assuming it's the same kind of thing with wildflowers as well.
Yeah, so that's the principle I'm working on, is diversity is strength. Diversity, both human and natural, is strength. And I think that was a quote from oh gosh, I've forgotten the name, Helen MacDonald, who wrote H is for Hawk, but I absolutely love that because it's true. Diversity is strength in every single aspect of life. And so you need to preserve that for things like you said about disease resistance, but also we don't know what we don't know. And once you've lost something, you can't get it back. Once something goes extinct or you lose a genetic variation, there's no pressing undo. And I think that's really hard to explain to people, and that's why things like plants, animals, insects going extinct really upsets me, because it's gone. You can't get that back. You can't remake it until we do, Jurassic Park style extracting DNA and growing it in a frog. But you can't, as it stands now, you can't remake it. So you should preserve it. And the other thing is things like crop wild relatives have been a big discussion recently. So there's a lot of wild species in the UK that are related to our crops, and they're trying to preserve those in case those are needed in the future for our crop breeding. So really, diversity is never a bad thing. And we've got a PhD funded to look into the genetic diversity of wildflowers, so the things that are coming from the wild and things that have been farmed for several generations, and seed packets, to actually see what the impact of that is, because I want to be able to give a definitive answer. But at the moment, I'm saying I can't imagine a situation where me or anyone else could definitively say that it's not important. So I think we should preserve it. Yeah.
No, definitely. That makes total sense. So what is the main way that we losing this diversity? Is it primarily due to the processes you mentioned, so sort of sieving, and is it kind of the way we're sorting seed? And is it where, organisations might be just, as you say, just reharvesting it from the same places, or, propagating it in a field, and then when that crop grows, they'll reharvest that and then sow it again, and that type of thing? Is that the main kind of reason, or are there other kind of things causing it too?
Well, I mean, that the reharvesting and everything is an issue. I can't speak for other organisations as to how often they go back to the wild stock. But most, I think all of the major seed suppliers in the UK are very responsible and will go back.
So it's sort of a well-known kind of issue we're potentially facing, or we already face.
We do know that the genetic diversity is an issue, and obviously some companies are better than others. But what we're trying to focus on is really making sure that we've got that diverse supply for Cornwall. And we would like to expand beyond Cornwall, but this is where we're based and this is our home. And we're working with other suppliers, to ensure that that the diversity is preserved. But generally, the majority of the suppliers in the UK are very responsible, and but we're really wanting to be able to provide wild seed, and that is the thing. There's not many people that can say, this is wild, this is within X generations, and we really want to be able to provide that for things like like work that we've done in the past with the marsh fritillary butterfly with Highways England. So when that project was occurring, so the marsh fritillary butterfly, the caterpillar is an obligate, the devil's bit scabious plant is an obligate host. And they wanted to link up two habitats where the marsh fritillary were by planting the devil's bit scabious along the road. And to do that project, they had to go and collect the seed themselves, and then at the time I was running the Seedbank for Eden, and then I cleaned it for them and we did the research on the germination and everything. What we'd like to get to a point at is where somebody could come to us and say, I need some wild devil's bit scabious for this project, and we've already got it, and you haven't got to go through those steps beforehand. But also, if somebody says, I've got this field, I want to create it, turn it into a meadow, that we could be able to provide local provenance mix for that kind of work.
No, that's really good. That makes total sense. Makes total sense. So how is it you're going about getting this project kind of moving? So who are you working with this? So is this primarily focused on sort of these roadside verges, or is it with farmers enhancing sort of pastoral fields and field margins, or? So that project has come to an end now, but it was primarily road verges for Highways England. It was a partnership, Highways England and Natural England, and they came to us because we had the knowledge of the seed and also the nursery space to do the propagation for the plants. And so that was primarily connecting up to Natural England habitats to allow the marsh fritillary to have a corridor to pass through. But in terms of the other work that we're doing, we're working with a range of people, landowners, some farmers, some organisations and private estates. And the big challenge for us has been finding sites that have enough wild diversity for us to collect seed from. Because what we don't want to do is, first of all, we don't want to collect from any sites that have been sown. So you have to go somewhere where the people know the history of the site. We want it to be wild, naturally occurring. And we don't want to collect more than 20% of what's there on a day, because we don't want to impact that wild population. But also, the third point is there's got to be enough there for us to make it worth us going for a day and hand collecting. Hand collecting is very labour intensive. Oh, I bet,
Yeah. So, and actually, I mean, I did appreciate before how nature depleted we are in this country, but I really appreciate it now. Trying to find naturally occurring meadows that are large enough that we can collect from by hand has been a challenge. And we've gone about it several ways, but a lot of it's just getting the word out there in local networks. And we've put some posts out on Eden Project social media, just saying to people, we're looking for these species. Have you got any of these on your land that we may be able to collect? But then the challenge, of course, is that people often don't know what they've got. I mean, I started studying horticulture, and we didn't do an awful lot of work with wild plants. And I've only recently, in the last few years, moved into botany. But a few years ago, I couldn't have told you, black knapweed from a creeping thistle, probably. Can now. I should hope so, anyway. But people don't know what they've got, so you're putting a call out. So you're looking for a subsection of people who've got land, have left it grow wild, and know what's on it. and that can be hard to find.
Yeah, I bet.
But we've been working with our local county recorder. You know, if he comes across anything in his work, a good site, then he will put the landowners in touch with us. And it's a challenge finding. We don't want to deplete what's there, and really it is like so much of it is on the coast path. On the so on those marginal places,
makes sense,
it's the places where it's not worth ploughing, farming, and those places that remain. But it has made me realise how important all of this is in terms of road verges, beyond the benefit for people and pollinators, but actually how important it is for the plants themselves. I mean, as I said before, the Viper's bugloss, I was so happy when we found that. I've never seen that naturally occurring in Cornwall before. I've only seen it growing in Wales.
Gosh.
Yeah.
It is really interesting to hear, isn't it? Because you do just kind of assume that there are these wild spaces left.
Yeah.
And actually they just aren't. Really.
Yeah.
You know, I've travelled a fair bit around different countries looking at how places are managed, and I think that's one of the things that always shocked me there is just how much the land has changed. Like even some of the, I won't name any, but even some of the countries that have really regenerated up to sort of 70% forest cover when they were down to sort of the 20s. Well, I will name one, it's Costa Rica. You go there and you think, wow, this is an amazing rainforest, but then you realise actually it's really not that old. No. So it's all kind of, this isn't how it used to be. So you've still potentially lost so much. Because, you know, when we do replant and recreate spaces, I mean, so I'm a landscape architect, so we obviously design, new landscapes and try and restore things. There are often a lot of challenges, you know, and especially in forestry and things too, when you're creating a new woodland, you often just plant the trees, you won't necessarily restore sort of ground flora and fauna but the ground flora as well. But also, you know, the fauna's missing too, which is a big problem. So, there are a lot of challenges around to actually getting it back to a really biodiverse state. And that's one of the things I think, you know, we need to bear in mind is it's not just, we were talking about this before, but it's not just a climate emergency, it's a biodiversity emergency too. And if we don't solve the biodiversity side, there's a real risk. And this is something we talked about this morning when we first arrived, was around the use of things like topsoil. Which brings us on to one of the new projects, which is to do with the link road. And that's obviously to do with roads again and connections. But we had a really interesting podcast a while ago with John Little, who does a lot of work on sort of substrates and things like that. And he worked with, I think it was Highways England, on a big road scheme over in Essex. And they basically stripped back all of this new road to reveal sand. And it was this beautiful sandbank. And nearby there was lots of nature reserves which had, Europeanly significant sandbanks. And they basically recreated this habitat, but then they came in and put topsoil over it, which is what we typically do on projects. And actually, we could have created a really rare, habitat that's very rare in occurrence, just by creating this new road, and we just sort of missed that opportunity. And I think that's something they are looking at now, of how actually we look at that when we do put new infrastructure in. Actually, do we just leave it as these kind of exposed areas? Because quite often you get places like quarries and all this type of thing that have biodiverse, or huge amounts of biodiversity that's quite rare and doesn't occur in other places, partly again because it's left alone. So maybe we can talk a bit about that project.
So I mean, the primary focus of our work in Cornwall really is we're working towards the A30 link roads. We've been asked by Cornwall Council to provide local provenance seed collected from Cornwall for the ecological restoration that goes on once that road is put in. And people who don't live in Cornwall don't know, it's basically connecting our main road, which is the A30 that goes down the centre of Cornwall, to St Austell, which is actually I believe our biggest town in Cornwall. And at the moment, to get from the main road to St Austell, you have to drive through a very small village that's having a lot of pollution issues, which is obviously not very good for the people who live there. And so that's what the link road's doing. But to do that, it's going through farmland and some natural habitat and some ex-mining land. So we're collecting local provenance seed primarily to reseed that road, but it's a lot. It's a lot of seed. So, but the topsoil thing is an issue, and our partners on that project are totally on board with not putting topsoil down. But we have come across other instances where people are resistant to not using topsoil. because it's a product that comes off the site, and if you remove it, it's a waste product, and you have to pay to remove it. But it's also not just a financial issue. It's people want to use, in a kind of circular economy situation, they want to use what's on the site, and if you're not well versed in wildflowers and ecological restoration, you would think that the local soil is the best thing to put down. Mm-hmm. People don't know the reason the topsoil is not the best thing to put down when you want wildflowers is it's often far too fertile, mm-hmm. and you'll get a lot of very strong species outcompeting. Even if you seed wildflowers on there, it will get outcompeted. So in Cornwall, the thing that you'll get coming up is gorse generally, which is a very, very spiky shrub. You don't want to be going in and weeding that out.
No.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. And people want to use it on site, but if you put topsoil down, you're making a lot more work for yourself. And the thing is, wildflower habitats, once you've made them, they're very low maintenance. They really require a cut once or twice a year and removal. But to be honest, I trained in horticulture, and it's the case in all horticulture. You've got to get the soil right at the start. Mm. You're not going to achieve anything if you haven't got the soil right.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, it's a fundamental building block, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. No, it is a big challenge, especially when so many developments and things are price conscious, and with the housing crisis and things like that, people are trying to keep costs as low as they can to try and build things more affordably. So it is a real challenge. But again, it's that trade-off of what's more important. Is it the carbon saving, or is it building in biodiversity? But then it's also about creating a mosaic of habitats as well on a lot of these spaces and schemes. It's we don't just want all one thing everywhere. We need to create a variety of things too. So there is kind of an opportunity to maybe take some away. It doesn't have to be a blanket solution. We can take some away in some areas and use it somewhere else maybe.
Yeah.
And again, the episode we did with John Little was really interesting because he uses a lot of things like crushed concrete and building material and building waste to create very low nutrient soil alternatives, which he seeds with wildflowers.
Yes.
And he's managed to do some of these without needing any gardening, really. I think there was one patch he said he's not really gardened it for 18 years.
Yeah.
And it's, incredibly beautiful, and it's really quite striking. So it's really interesting to see that there are sort of other ways around it too, of sort of creating soils using waste products that actually can kind of meet the requirements we need, especially when we're trying to do them in a very urban area.
Yes.
If you can recycle materials, if you're doing demolishing something, for example, and you can recycle those materials back into the scheme, then there's an opportunity there to recycle, save carbon, and create something that's not going to require huge amounts of maintenance. I mean, wildflowers are much lower maintenance than mowing grass and everything else anyway.
Yeah.
But it's even less.
Yeah.
So again, that's another saving to sort of look at.
We've actually got a site here at Eden that we're going to be doing some trial plots on the various different waste materials from around Cornwall, basically. So different things that would be used, like the crushed concrete, to see how they work. And that's part of what we're doing is we're providing this. We're trying to gather the seed and provide that, but there's also a lot of research going on here. We've got links with Exeter, strong links at Exeter University and the University of Plymouth. There's a lot of students here at Eden now doing research on different aspects. Some are researching dormancy breaking requirements of wildflower seeds. Some of them it's nutrient requirements and that kind of thing. And so the thing with the creating a low nutrient base for the wildflowers is people often say this to me, that wildflowers like a lack of nutrient, don't they? And that's actually not the case. They are as happy with a whole load of nitrogen as anything else is. The problem is they're not competitive enough and they can't outcompete the weeds. So that's why you want to create a low nutrient space, is you're creating an environment that's in a way stressful enough that they've got the adaptations to outcompete whatever else is trying to grow there. Generally, grass.
Yeah, that's
grass.
Yeah, I've not heard it that way before.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So it makes absolute sense as well. When you think they would have been growing on sort of areas with very thin soils and all of this type of thing too.
Yeah, they've got their niche is a high stress environment, basically. And if you put them in a low stress environment, they can't compete. Yeah.
I suppose also your job gets slightly harder with these seed zones you mentioned.
Yes.
So, for example, you were saying earlier about how you're trying to get seed from these meadows, the very specific requirements. You need a landowner with the right type of land that's managed in the correct way, with a specific type of meadow. But then, if you're trying to cast a net to try and find everywhere, you're then also bound by these seed zones as well. So, is that something that you're trying to build up here? Are you trying to collect seed from the different zones, or are you focusing primarily on Cornwall?
So right now we're focusing on Cornwall because that's where we're based and that's where we've got the connections. But in the future we'd like to work on a county by county basis, and also I want to do more research to know is the flora of Cornwall genetically different to the flora of Devon? Or can you use Devon seed in Cornwall, or that? So that's the kind of thing that we're working on, which is why it's so great that we've got all these links with these universities, and but the seed zones are primarily a forestry thing. So but they are also used by the Millennium Seedbank for when they're collecting seeds across the UK. So they want broadly, if you've got seeds from each of the different seed zones. I think most of the research is done for trees, but they say then you're covering a good proportion of the genetic diversity in the UK.
Yeah, I suppose it probably makes sense because a lot of it's probably wind dispersed, isn't it, I would guess?
Or
is it not really? Am I completely wrong?
Wildflowers, actually not that much wind dispersed. Some of them like the hawkbits and the cat's ears, but dispersal, I think generally is going to be birds and animals, actually. Oh, really? Well, some of them don't seem to disperse very far, I'm going to be honest.
Well, that probably means it is more varied then, much more varied, because you're going to get your local microclimates and valleys and all that type of places. You're probably more likely to get a specific genetic variation there, aren't you?
Yes, yeah.
So it's probably even more complex
than
a lot of the trees are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of research to be done in the future, and that's why it's really exciting. That's why I love doing this job. There's so much to find out, and there's things are different every day. Some days you might be out collecting seed by hand. Some days you might be cleaning it. Sometimes you might be driving a combine harvester. Sometimes you might be researching dormancy requirements. It's
yeah, no, it's interesting. Quite varied. There's a lot more to it than you think.
Yeah.
So how does the cleaning it come about? What is that?
Okay, so when you collect seed by hand, generally it's still in some kind of seed casing. So either in the pod, or some things you can just tap into a bucket. But then you're still going to have bits, insects in there, and though we do let the insects escape, I will say that we don't bring them to their dooms, and you have insects and chaff and all sorts of things in there. So we clean the seed so that we know how much we've got, really.
So it's taking all the extra stuff away.
Yeah, all the extra stuff. So in some cases it might be just seed pods, and getting them out of the pods can be really challenging. So there's plant bird's foot trefoil. That's got it's in the pea family, it's got tiny thin little pods, and and the seeds are like minuscule little dots. And you'll have a whole bag of this, and you're like, this is great, and you'll end up with this tiniest little packet. But so sometimes it's getting them out in pods, in which case we either do that by hand or we'll use blender. And that's a bit of a fine art, because you want to get the pods open but not damage the seed. Yeah. So that's kind of that's where the experience comes in, and we've got 2 apprentices that work with us, and they have been an absolute blessing, and they're so passionate about learning about this. And I say to them, like, I don't know how to do all this off the top of my head. We're working it out. They'll bring me a species and say, how do we clean this? And I'm like, let's have a go. Let's go. You try that thing, and we'll work it out. And so we'll blend them and then sieve them, usually through a variety of different grades of sieve, and then quite often we'll aspirate them as well.
So what's aspirating?
So aspiration is where you have a machine, and it's got, so our one is hand-built machine off a plan from the Real Seed Company. They've got an open source aspirator.
Okay.
If anybody felt like building one themselves. Luckily, we've got carpenters here that built it for me. That was my Christmas present last year from the carpentry team. And so they and then we run it off a Henry Hoover. And it produces vacuum in the machine, and it sucks away the chaff. but the seed falls down this little like helter-skelter mechanism. So your seed falls down, all your chaff is pulled away, but you're not hoovering the seed up. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's quite clever. Yeah.
So it's a mechanical version of what winnowing that people would have done thousands of years ago, where you're throwing the seed up in the air and you're letting the light stuff blow away, but the seed is heavy enough that it won't blow away. I have done winnowing in the past, and that is really hard.
I bet,
yeah, I've tried blowing on it, and I've tried using a fan. That was when I ran the old Seedbank, and it's the aspirator is much easier, but that gets it really clean, and it's amazing actually, and it's really satisfying when you go from this big bag of stuff and you get this beautiful little clean packet of seed. And the other thing that's nice is aspiration will actually also remove empty seeds. So sometimes seed can look like it's fine, but there's actually nothing in there. And that will be removed by the aspirator because there's nothing inside the seed. It's light enough to be pulled away.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I suppose the challenge is sod's law, not all of the seed will work in any particular method.
No.
Yes, you have to have lots of different methods,
Yeah.
And then you have to essentially put it back together as a sort of mix
yes.
with the right sort of proportions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite labour intensive then.
It is, yeah. And but if you're harvesting something with a combine harvester, then the cleaning process is more industrial. It's not just me with a sieve. But yeah, in which case we send our seed off to be cleaned in that case.
Yeah.
But it's the same process. It goes through a sieving, three layers of sieves in a machine, industrial aspiration. There's also things called, I've forgotten the name, they're like big long cylinders, and they can separate seed based on whether it's round or long. So if you've got two seeds that have the same diameter, but one of them, they will both go through the sieve, but if one of them is 3 times as long, you can separate them with that machine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah, it is amazing. I'm always in awe of engineers, actually, and I think to be able to just go, right, I've got this mechanical, physical problem, and they can come up with something to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
And it's been around for a long time. Those machines have been around, a really long time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's, again, quite surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about the industrial side of it? So obviously, with you looking for such a sort of niche area sort of all over the place, it's not probably worth getting some of these big industrial machines.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is also part of the challenge of this, trying to restore the genetic diversity.
Yeah.
You have to kind of start at that smaller scale and then build up from there and try and introduce it. And at some point, once we've covered Cornwall with this really diverse range of wildflowers, you could then look at a more sort of industrial process maybe to try and sort it out.
So our wild collected seed that we are hand collecting and hand cleaning at the moment, some of that will be used directly in projects, but some of it we are putting in the ground to farm it. And I'm working off the recommendations is the word I'm looking for the Society of Ecological Restoration. So we're going to keep going back to the wild stock. That's not going to be farmed forever, but it's just too labour intensive to collect by hand. The amounts that you're getting out, you're getting like 100 grams, and you think about the time that's taken. Yeah. And that's the problem as well. When you've got that very small amount, you can't really clean it in any industrial way because it's just too small to put through the machine. So we are putting those seeds into the ground and then hoping to create areas that we can harvest from with a lot more ease. And again, that's going to be a benefit to people who want to use the seed, because the easier it is for us to harvest it, the less we have to charge.
I definitely know that makes sense.
Yeah,
but it's not just wildflower seed you're also involved with, is it? Because you're looking at juniper as well.
Yeah, so we've got some conservation projects. So juniper is a project that's been running at Eden for quite a long time. I think it's about 15 years now. Oh, wow. And that's a subspecies of juniper that's very low growing. It's called Juniperus communis, subspecies hemispherica, and there was only 13 plants of this subspecies left on the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. And some reintroduction had been done in the 1970s, but unfortunately a flare was let off from, I believe it was Falmouth Regatta, and it landed right in the middle of this block of reintroduced species and burnt them all. Oh God. Yeah, so there's
back to square one.
Back to square one, yeah. So Natural England wanted to do some work on, and that this work is done in partnership with Natural England and funded by them. And so propagating and reintroducing that subspecies. So it's still present, but only 13 plants. So I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we reintroduced 200 plants from cuttings.
Wow.
And they're in, so we reintroduced some around the original plants, but also a completely separate population, a very long way away from the coast. So hopefully nobody's going to put a flare on it. And so those are doing really well now. And but also I've been working on collecting seed and propagating these plants from seed. So juniper's got something called deep physiological dormancy, and that means that the seed has to go through several periods of warm and cold cycles in order to germinate. The other difficulty with juniper is that it takes 2 years from pollination to the seed being ripe. So it's at least 4 years from pollination to germination for juniper. Yeah. And that's
a long time.
That's all juniper, yeah. So I've managed to grow 6 plants from seed, but I have been speaking with some other juniper experts in the UK, and we're generally a bit worried that perhaps the genetic diversity of that subspecies is too small now, and that's why the seeds aren't germinating. But we have sent seed off to the Millennium Seedbank, so it is banked for posterity. And that's what's really good. So before we started doing this reintroduction, the older plants, mature plants that were there, were not really producing much seed. And now we've reintroduced these ones from cuttings. We're getting a lot more seed off the ones with cuttings and the mature plants. So it means there's a lot more to send off to be preserved.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so the Millennium Seedbank is, they are doing they're preserving for conservation purposes. They're not using the seed like we are from wildflowers. Yeah.
Oh, right. I was thinking you need to partner with some sort of gin company or something like that to see if there's any variation in the gin and get them involved in the funding it and things.
Yeah, that idea did go around. Yeah, I would have. I said I'll keep the berries, but you've got to let me get all the seeds out first. I'm not giving you the seeds.
That's it.
Yeah,
no, that's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
So is there, because I remember you mentioning the lizards, a really interesting area, and it has quite a lot of, sort of rare species of plants and sorts of things. Yeah. So what else is kind of going on
so we've got another project that we've just started this year on the lizard, and that's so I would say on the lizard a lot. If you don't come from Cornwall saying, yes, I've been out on the lizards, is very weird. It's like a really weird sentence. On the Lizard Peninsula, I should say. And there's a lot of crop wild relatives down there, which I mentioned earlier on. And so we've got a project similar to the juniper on the Asparagus prostratus, which is another low-growing species of wild asparagus down there, to propagate and reintroduce it around the peninsula. So there are several places where the asparagus is doing amazingly well, and then there's some where there are just one plant on their own. So what we want to do is the ones where there's one plant on their own, bolster that population just so it's a bit more secure. And that's we've sown the seed. We'll see in spring whether they've germinated. I'm hoping that they're going to. Yeah, but there's a lot of rare plants down there because the bedrock is serpentine, and that's basically is different to all the rest of Cornwall because it was pushed up from below the Earth's crust millions of years ago and smashed into Cornwall, and so the soil there is really high magnesium. And when you do soil tests, it's really obvious. And there's a lot of specialist flora down there. Yeah, well known in the botany circles for being a good place to go if you want to have a good time. Yeah. But I feel really lucky that that's on my doorstep, and I get to go down there for work. Every single time I go down there to work on the junipers or the asparagus, I just think this is amazing. Yeah.
It's a really beautiful part of the world as well.
It is, really gorgeous.
So there's obviously a lot of really interesting things going on. So what does the future of the project look like? What sort of things are you hoping to do and achieve, and where are you hoping to end up in the next few years?
Well, we'd like to get to a point where we've got a source of local provenance seed for ecological restoration within Cornwall. That's it's a proactive, not a reactive situation. With the National Wildflower Centre, we'd like to do that across the country, and continuing working with housing developers, road builders, any of those in situations where you've got an opportunity for habitat restoration, to input that to create these biodiversity in marginal spaces, and also to continue the work that we've got a long legacy of in inner cities where you're working. The work is just as much about the people as it is about the plants and the pollinators. So that's really what we're looking at in the next few years, and it's exciting, and we're going to get there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, well, it's so important, and I think everyone's realizing just how much there is to do and how many challenges there are and how many opportunities there are. To sort of start tackling some of these challenges and try and restore nature. It's not just about as we've said many times now, carbon. It's about how do we restore nature? How do we try and regenerate the natural world? And part of it, has to be, genetic variation as well. It's not, you don't want the same thing everywhere, because if something comes along, like a disease or whatever, like we already talked about, that's, it's all in jeopardy, isn't it? So it's about building that resilience in, and true resilience, not, an artificial resilience. So you've got so much going on. So how about people getting involved? Is it possible for people to get involved?
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, if people want to get in contact, to get involved with our work, or for us to get involved with their work, our contact address is NWC, so NWC for National Wildflower Centre, at edenproject.com. And also, that's the same address if people want to volunteer. We've also got a citizen science programme coming up that where we are going to train people in botany and identification. And then they will be able to get involved in the seed collecting side of it, and we'll also get a lot of biological records off of that. So there's a lot of training involved, because you have to make sure that you've got permission from the landowner. It's not acceptable to collect seed from anywhere. I haven't mentioned that up to this point, but we do. It's all done with permission and agreements. So so that's the big thing that we're excited about, is this citizen science project promoting botany and identification and seed collection.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah,
nice. It's good to see. Yeah, good to see there's so many sort of initiatives and things going on, and there is the opportunity for people to get involved.
Oh yeah.
So I think a lot of people will be really interested in sort of preserving something and getting involved in keeping something for future generations. It's really important.
If anyone lives locally and wants to come and volunteer, they're most welcome.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating finding out about what's going on in the wildflower world, and how complex it kind of is, and how many challenges there are, but how much kind of hope there is to restore these things too, and that this really important work is going on. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for coming. It's definitely the time. Everybody wants wildflowers now, and I'm really pleased about that.
No, they should. Incredible things. Add beauty, pollinators, everything you want.
Yep. So. Plants, people, pollinators.
That's
it. The trifecta.
That's it. Well, look forward to catching up again soon. Maybe catch up on some of the projects and see how things have developed.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's important to remember that sustainability doesn't just relate to the environment, it relates to your finances as well. That's why we switched to Beans Accountants. Beans operate on a package system, so you always know where you stand. We halved our accountancy costs when we moved to them, and one of our associates moved to them as well and reduced theirs by 2/3. With free tax advice, accountancy support, and everything else they offer, you can't go wrong. So make sure you check out Beans Accountants in the description below, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. So we're here with Max today, looking at the new geothermal site here at Eden, which is a pretty impressive tower going on there behind this fence. We're this side of the fence for safety reasons, and because they're moving a lot of the equipment at the moment. So maybe you could tell us a bit about what's going on here.
So we're here drilling a geothermal well with a company called MND. They're from the Czech Republic, and they're drilling a geothermal well. And we're drilling to a depth, we've just drilled to a depth of 5,286 metres.
Gosh.
That's the length of the well. In terms of the vertical, we've gone about 4,900. That's our total vertical depth. We've drilled the well with a rig called a Bentec 450. And that means 450, as in 450 tonnes of lift.
Yeah.
So there aren't actually any rigs in this country that can drill to that depth within the granite that have enough lifting capacity for us. So we've had to go out to tender, and the only tenders that we've had back in have basically been from European companies because of the specifications of the rig itself.
Yeah.
So, do you want me to talk about the geothermal?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
So, the reason for drilling here is that we are drilling in the granite beneath us. The granite beneath us is hot at depth, so we've got a geothermal gradient within the granite, and the granite is for every 1,000 meters that we drill, we get an increase in temperature of around 40 degrees centigrade. So in theory, at 5,000 meters, we should be at around 200 degrees centigrade. So we already know it's hot down there. We have some measurements of the heat. We've got up to around 160 degrees centigrade so far. That's about 4,500 meters, and the well is still quite cool from our drilling. So we know that it's a good well and it's pretty hot.
So why are you drilling here?
So we're drilling here because the granite beneath us is warm. We're in the what's known as a Cornubian batholith, and that is basically an outcrop of granite within this area, within Cornwall, Cornubian. And the granite here is warmer at a shallower depth than anywhere else, effectively in the country.
Okay.
So we've got this geothermal gradient, as I already talked about, and that's why we're drilling here. This is essentially a research well. It's the project is an ERDF, European Regional Development funded project. We also have funding from Cornwall Council and an institutional investor. But effectively, without that ERDF funding, we would not be able to drill this well. So it is a research well. No one has ever drilled to this sort of depth within the Cornubian batholith here underneath us. So really, we know that it's hot down there because of the geothermal gradient, but we want to find some permeability. And what we want to do and what our target zone is we've drilled down, and effectively we're looking for a permeable zone called the Great Cross Course. And that's effectively a permeable zone that runs north-south. Well, it's a fault zone that runs north-south across Cornwall. And what we've done is we've drilled down and we've effectively gone through that permeable zone. Because what we want is that permeability so that we can use fluid and pump it through that permeability in order to heat it up. So the full project would be 2 wells where we would, and they would both intersect the Great Cross Course. We would pump cool water down one and then pump the cool water would then go through the geology and come back up the other well. It would come back up the other well heated. We would have to pump it back up, and then we would put that through a heat exchanger, which would drive a turbine, which would produce electricity. We're thinking that we could probably produce around 7 megawatts here, which would maybe give us 5 to 6 megawatts to go to the grid. At this stage, though, as I keep emphasising, it's a research well. We don't know much about the geology, and we're just finding that out now. We've literally just finished drilling only properly a couple of days ago. So we're actually getting to kind of rig down stage at the moment, and in about 3 or 4 weeks, this drilling rig will be gone completely. So we've got a whole bunch of testing to do of our well, and that's probably going to take us a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, to work out, okay, this is what we've got, and this is the amount of energy that we could potentially produce from this well and from a 2-well system.
Yeah, so this first well is going to be used primarily to heat Eden, isn't it? That's kind of the aim with the first one. But then with the second well, it becomes more efficient with having 2. Is it more efficient as well as obviously having more capacity? Is that part of it?
For phase 1, which is what we're doing now, what we'll do is we'll put a heat exchanger down into the well.
Yeah.
And then we'll pump warm water up through that heat exchanger, put it through a plate heat exchanger on the surface, and then we'll have pipes running down to the Eden project and to the Eden project's plant room, where it will interface with the Eden project's heating system, and then it will heat the biomes. Okay. That's phase one of the system. Now, what was your question about the?
So with the second well, does it increase efficiency because you're essentially in this one the water's going down and back up, whereas this one it will go down one and back up the second one because it like permeates through the fissure in the rock, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The fault line, so it sort of permeates through that, and that's one of the bits I was struggling to get my head around is how on earth you make sure it goes the right way. But with the 2-well system, you're essentially, I know this because you explained it to me earlier, is you create an area of sort of lower pressure to help the water kind of move through this fissure in the rock.
Yeah. So essentially, in order to get the flows that we need through the flow of, it's all about how many litres per second can we actually get down one well, through the fissures, through the geology within the rock, and back up the other well. And what we'll do is we pump up through the well where we want to draw the water up through, and that will automatically create an area of low pressure, and we know that we'll be able to get flow between those 2 wells, and we'll be able to heat that water up to a certain temperature. It will then go up, it will go through a heat exchanger at surface, it will then heat a motive fluid that will drive a turbine, then once it's done that work, it will go back down. I mean, and it won't go back down cold.
Yeah.
It will go back down a number of degrees centigrade
warmer,
cooler.
Oh, cooler.
To go back down.
Why was it?
Will go cool. Cooler? Cool.
Yeah.
Heated.
Yeah.
Hot.
Cool.
Heat exchanger. Motive fluid will take the energy.
Yeah.
We'll take that heat energy.
Yeah. Heat
and pressure out, and then it will go back down. It won't go down. It will just go down a little bit cooler, basically.
Yeah.
Not much cooler. So the mindset is that we pump cold water down. It's never cold.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. I thought it would just be cold water going down, but I suppose it's just the same water, isn't it? Whatever's left goes back down again.
It's just doing a loop. That's all that it's doing, and it's just doing a loop, grabbing a bit more energy, bringing it back up. And effectively, that energy in the ground is endless.
Yeah.
As if it's managed properly, then we'll know, we'll have an equilibrium where we know what temperature we can send down there and how much we can send down there in terms of litres per second. And that will just come back up, do a loop, take the energy out at the top, put it back down, gets heated, and it just goes around in a big loop. Exactly the same as the motive fluid at the top, which essentially will probably be a binary plant. And a binary plant runs with, usually the motive fluid is something like pentane, so something that has quite a low boiling temperature. So pentane probably boils at around 40 degrees centigrade. So what will happen is that hot water steam that comes up heats the pentane. The pentane will then boil, create pressure, drive the turbine, and once it's driven the turbine and lost its energy, it will go back around. So it's just 2 systems going like this. Oh, right. So it's relatively simple in a lot of ways. Yeah, it is, and that's the beauty of it. It's a very simple system. I say, and you talk about the management side. So the one thing with geothermal is we're never going to run out of it, but there is a limit to sort of, as you say, the amount of water that can be pushed through the system and the temperatures and all that type of thing. So with this experimental well, you're going to be figuring out a bit more about how much of that actually goes through to kind of maximise efficiency of it, essentially. So that's exactly it. What we're looking at is, okay, what's the flows, what's the temperatures that we've got down there, what happens when we put water down there, when we put cooler water down there, what happens to the system, and how does it heat back up? Does it heat back up quickly? Does it heat back up slowly? So there's a lot for us to do and a lot for us to understand about this system, about the reservoir, and that's essentially what it is. It's a heat reservoir underneath us that we're managing.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it, because you don't often think about it in that sort of manner, do you? So the other thing I was going to ask you really is, so at the moment, maybe we could just have a quick explain a bit about what's sort of going on behind us, and then we can talk a bit about kind of the next phase and geothermal kind of as an energy source in the UK, maybe. Yep. So at the moment, everything's sort of being taken down now, isn't it? Now that you've finished drilling this well.
We're kind of reducing our operations. We're actually what they call laying down drill pipe at the moment. So all this drill pipe that here, so on the left hand side of the rig there, of the mast, are stands of drill pipe, and all of those stands of drill pipe have been down in the hole, and they've all been lifted back up and put to one side because there's nothing in the hole anymore. So what we're doing at the moment right now is we're taking that drill pipe and we're basically bringing it down and we're putting it over here, and that's actually going back to the Czech Republic as we speak, which is where the rig's originally from. So we've drilled this hole in stages. So we've basically started off with a conductor. So that gives us some stability within the site. So the actual wellhead itself is kind of behind this sort of yellow and green thing here. There's a red thing, which is maybe we can have a look at it later on. That's a blowout preventer. So because we're going to those sort of depths, we don't exactly know what's down there, so we need to have a blowout preventer. We don't know what sort of gases we're going to get, and they potentially might be flammable gases. So we have this thing called a blowout preventer, and as we're drilling, if we have a gas that we hit in a certain area and it comes to surface, then we can go like this around our drill string and stop that gas from coming to surface if required. And as I said, so we've drilled in sections. So we've started off with a 36-inch section, and that's gone to about 25 meters, I think it was. And then we've drilled with this 26-inch drilling bit here. Can you see that one? And then we've within that we've put a 20-inch pipe. So that's a 20-inch casing. And that's gone all the way to the bottom of that section, and that section is 241 meters long. So, what we do with those pipes is we basically screw each one together and put it in the ground down as it's going in. So we put it in, we hold it, we screw another one in, we screw another one in, and then once it's at the bottom, we cement it in place. So once we've cemented that in place, then the pipe in place, then we're ready to do our next section, which is this section here, which is a 17.5-inch section. And that's a 17.5-inch drill bit there. And we've used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 bits, I can't remember off the top of my head, for that section.
And you're using so many because it's so hard, because the granite's so hard and they sort of wear out as they go down.
So yeah, the granite is very hard and it's very abrasive, and what we found is that a lot of these drill bits come out and they are maybe half an inch less in terms of their gauge, in terms of their diameter than when they went in.
Gosh.
So they're probably, I think they're averaging about a couple of 100 meters. Yeah, but sort of a couple of 100 meters per drill bit, and it's probably 15 or 20 grand a drill bit.
Gosh.
Yeah, especially in the 17 and a half.
Business. Yeah.
And they're specialists. They're made specifically for this type of rock.
Oh right, so they're custom made, or just
Well, for this, yeah, we've had to go out and actually order these bits, and there's a coding system for different types of drill bits that will drill in different types of rock. And essentially, there aren't many because people don't really want to drill holes in granite.
No.
Funny that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't find any oil and gas deposits or anything like that within granite. So essentially, we've had to get these specially made to that specification.
Gosh, and while we're on the difficulty of actually drilling down, that's partly why these bits of pipe are all going off, isn't it?
Yes.
To have them repaired, because you'd think, well, I personally would have thought that the only bit that would sort of really get a bit of wear and tear is the drill bit, which is sort of burrowing through it. But actually, you were saying that these the bits of pipe are also getting abrasion from going up and down the hole.
Yes, absolutely. So we've drilled a directional well. So we've got to 1,700 meters in our well, and then we've gone off at an angle to hit our target zone, which is this great cross course. Yeah. So that angle is up to sort of 40 degrees at times. So what's happening when you're drilling is that the drill string itself, which is driving the drill bit, is actually lying against the side of the well bore when it's going around. So all these tool joints are being worn out, and as we've already said, the granite's hard, the granite's really abrasive. So we've managed to wear out a lot of drill bits and a lot of our drill string as well. And it's certainly something to take into account as a lesson learned for later, and just in terms of the knowledge of the costs, because it costs a lot to read what they call redress all of this drill string.
Yeah, no, I bet. I mean, this project is costing what, 16.8 million?
Yeah.
Is the estimated cost of just this one?
That's just the one. Yeah. That's the one well. That then does include the heat exchanger. Yeah. And we'll have some above ground pipe work.
Yeah, going down to Eden.
Going down, we'll have an above ground pipe work here, a plate heat exchanger probably around here somewhere, and then we'll have pipe work that goes all the way down to the Eden plant room, which is about 1.5K.
Oh wow, so it's quite a long way.
It's a good distance, So there's quite a lot of money just in that. Yeah. But this is, drilling. Our drilling operation is by far the most costly exercise.
Yeah, well, I can see.
Generally for geothermal. It's the capital expenditure is quite a lot. It's always a lot, but it essentially, assuming the resource is managed properly, assuming that reservoir is managed properly, then it's free energy. Yeah, well, nothing's ever free, but like assuming it's managed properly, it's not as if we are burning oil, burning gas, burning coal to produce that electricity. Yeah, it's the same as, it's renewable. It's the same as wind. It's the same as solar, except it's running all the time. It's running this will run 24/7, and we'll probably have maybe 3% downtime or something like that for maintenance of the plant itself. Yeah. Generally, these plants don't need a huge amount of maintenance.
Yeah, and you were saying in terms of lifespan, the minimum kind of lifespan is estimated to be about 40 years, but some projects have gone on for much longer than that. And there's only, and actually in terms of replacement parts, the well is still there, that doesn't need maintaining as such. It's actually just sort of any moving bits like pumps and things like that might actually need replacing. Most of it's kind of and doesn't need replacing once it's put in.
So your plant, any power station needs maintenance. Any power station after 25 years might need some sort of refurbishment or potentially scrapping completely. And that's generally, I mean certainly nuclear power stations, I think their design life's 25, 30 years. So and as I said earlier, there are plants that certainly the oldest geothermal plant in the world, which is in Wairarapa, New Zealand, that's still running. That's a 60-year-old plant. Gosh. So the resource itself is a completely renewable resource. That's always there. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes we might have to do re-sleeve of the wells, but generally, it's a renewable resource that will be there for a long time, and we're not burning anything to actually get that energy.
No, it's really important. It's really important. It's impressive to see how much, like, the work that goes into producing something like this.
Yeah, and it's taken us about 5 months to drill this well.
Gosh,
so
that's a long time.
Yeah, it is a long time. We could probably get it down to 4.
Yeah.
For the next well.
Yeah.
We'd know, okay, maybe we don't need to drill with this many different sections. Maybe we don't need this 17.5-inch section next time.
Yeah.
So that's already a saving, but that's already a saving of time as well. So there's a lot of lessons learned for the next well, and certainly a huge amount of cost saving.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So phase 2 is, because phase 2 is not just another well, is it? It's also a potential power plant as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a bit more going into that second phase than just, so as you say, this is the first experimental well to kind of see how it all works. If everything's as it seems to be so far and as is hoped, will that then lead to the second phase going in?
So depending on the results from this well and the results of our testing, we will then drill a second well. That would be to potentially around the same sort of depth, maybe a little bit less, and then we would, and that would be designed so that we would know approximately the size of plant that we would require, and we'd want to try and go for 5 or 6, maybe 7 megawatts. That would be a binary plant, as I've already said before.
Yeah.
So, and that would be built basically just kind of behind where the drilling rig is now.
Okay.
And that's really a very sort of small, unobtrusive sort of two-story building that mainly consists of cooling fans.
Yeah.
So because a bunch of cooling fans and some turbines. And very, as I said, very unobtrusive. So you'd hardly see it with the trees that we've got around here. It would fit in really well.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point to make, because you see this and you think, my God, geothermal was a massive endeavour, but this is the drill, isn't it?
Well, this is it.
Once that's gone, as you say, it's just going to be a normal, building. You wouldn't necessarily even know what it was.
This is basically just our drilling rig. This is just part of the development of a geothermal plant. And so, as I said, 5 months, that's gone.
Yeah.
So in 3 weeks' time, there's nothing here, basically. Yeah. There's literally will be maybe a few bits of pipe over there, but you'll come along and you'll go, oh, what was all the fuss about?
Yeah. Yes, it's pretty impressive, really. So we thought we'd just have a quick look at, where some of these deposits are in the UK and some of the potential for geothermal, and why Cornwall's such an important area for it. So, in Cornwall, within Cornwall, we have these outcrops, big outcrop of granite called the Cornubian batholith, which basically runs along the spine of Cornwall itself. There are other areas where there's good outcrops of sort of warmer granite up in Northumberland, and I think there's some up in Scotland up here. But I think we have, in terms of heat and gradient, in terms of that increase in temperature, about 40 degrees per kilometre, we're certainly in the right spot here, and that's basically what we've found when we've been drilling. So what we're doing when we're drilling is we're looking for these fracture zones. If we just keep drilling straight down into the granite, we will find heat. But we're looking for permeability, because we want to move the water within the permeability. If we just go up here, so this is the area that we're looking for. This is this fracture zone, and it's called the Great Cross Course, and it runs north-south across Cornwall. And that's been sort of mapped over many years by geologists by looking at sort of surface outcropping, but also old mine workings, and some work that we've done from the surface. So
with this well, and this is the well that we think we've just drilled here, is that we've come down to about 1,700 meters, and now we've basically kicked off, and we've gone at an angle through the Great Cross Course, and we're not sure if we're fully through it. We're still doing a whole lot of what we call wireline work, which is basically we send tools down the hole, and it kind of maps the geology for us, so that we can hopefully see where this is. And this is the whole thing about this, is that it's a research well. We don't know much at all about this Great Cross Course.
Yeah.
So,
but if you find it is what you want, it's, you know, the potential of a whole new industry starting down here in Cornwall, you know, which can run all the way along, because, you know, it's easy to think, okay, well, there's this one kind of this sort of vein running through the centre of Cornwall, and actually, you can only have one sort of plant, but actually you could have a whole string of plants all the way along the vein doing this all the way along. So the potential of it is enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The potential of it for Cornwall and for the whole country really is enormous, and that's good. I like that. Potential is enormous. So just on our site alone, if this was a really good resource, then we could actually maybe have another 2 wells, another 4 wells, and suddenly we're potentially producing 20, maybe 30 megawatts just from this one site alone. Never mind the fact that there are, as you said, other sites that are on the Great Cross Course, but also there are other fracture zones. Yeah. So there are other faults across the whole of Cornwall. So there's potentially hundreds of sites, and it's a great thing. It could be a great thing for Cornwall. Could be a whole new industry of effectively small power stations dotted around the whole county.
Yeah. And I just want to ask one question as to why it sort of branches off at this angle. So you're saying you want to go through the this sort of vein. I keep calling it a vein, but the fracture.
Yep.
And is it you're trying to go right the way through it to the other side, or are you trying to sort of sit within it?
We're trying to, for this well, we want to know that it's there.
Yeah,
and
so it's more mapping it and understanding it
at
really.
This stage, and we want to know, but really we would want to go right the way through it, so that then we can use what we've got, this open hole section. Yeah. So we've drilled down to nearly 4,000 meters, and we've put a casing in all the way back to surface. That's a 10-inch, effectively a 10-inch casing, and that's called our production casing. And say that comes to around here, then we've drilled the next around 1,200 meters, what we call open hole. So that's basically open to that all that heat. It's open to that the whole place. So it all depends on where we have flows coming into it'd be this well, where we have the flows coming into this well. So it really does depend on the work that's happening at the moment around going down with these tools and looking and mapping that geology. Where do we have heat coming in? Where do we have flows, basically, within this open hole section here?
And that will tell you then where to put the next well, essentially, to line up with that effectively. And how far apart would they be?
Well, we don't know.
It depends on
we
how
don't.
It looks.
All depends on how good this well is and what we find down there. Hundreds of meters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's still quite a fair distance then between them.
Yeah.
And one of the things on that we were discussing earlier again was kind of that actually initially, because it's not necessarily had water move through it before, it might be a bit slower for water to sort of permeate through. But over time, that capacity would increase, and that's part of the exploration process, is figuring out, and that will differ on varying locations, but how much can actually be sort of passed through each fissure.
It's like anything, but when you're trying to create a flow, you need, it takes time basically to create a flow through here, and that flow will increase over time basically. As we get more, as we know more and more about it, and there's all sorts of techniques that we can use to actually tell us that we are creating that flow here. So there's things called tracers that we can put down here, and we can tell straight away that we are getting a connection between here. But we'll know, we'll absolutely know.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the results are.
It will be. Yeah.
I was reading Bill Gates' new book on how to stop a climate crisis. I can't remember exactly the title of it now, and that was talking about geothermal and different types of energy. And one of the things he points out in that book is that, I can't remember the study, but based on the study that was done, it was estimated that the UK could only have, if the whole of the UK was covered in geothermal, so every square metre of the UK, it would only be able to produce about 2% of the UK's energy requirement. So do you know much about that, and whether or not is it true or anything?
That sounds pretty pessimistic. So there was a study done by a big consultancy, big engineering consultancy, multinational, and that came out, and that hasn't been out long. I can't remember the name of the consultancy. Maybe it's 12 months ago.
Yeah, so it's probably since this book has been published. Yeah.
So they had estimated up to 20%.
So it's pretty significant.
That is significant. Personally, to get to 20%, we need more government funding.
Yeah.
We really need the government to get behind it, and this project is funded by the ERDF. Why is the ERDF funding this project? It's not the right funding mechanism. Really. I mean, it's great. That we've got the money to do this project, and we are really hoping that it works, and that it brings a whole industry to Cornwall. That's what we want to happen. But is that the right thing? Is that the right mechanism? So we need, and moving forward, there is no more ERDF funding. And this industry still needs funding in order to get it to the next stage. So basically, this is R&D. We need to get to demonstration. And we're not there yet. And we need help in order to do that. And that help can only come from the government.
Indeed, yeah, definitely. Well, it's got huge promise. It's going to be really exciting to find out what does happen, what you find out, what's going on, and what you decide to do with the next steps. So it'd be great to come back and talk to you guys about how that's all developing and what's going on at some point in the future. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's really interesting, and it's amazing to see that these things are going on, because there's a lot of fantastic projects just starting to kick off, but you don't always find out about them or hear about what's really going on. So it's great to get a better understanding of it. And geothermal, has got a really important place potentially in, the energy mix, because it's all part of the mix, isn't it? It's diversifying our energy supply. So, and if that can play a really important place, especially in baseload, which is what we're having which is where the real problem is at the moment, and where the other renewables can't quite stack up unless we, do a lot with battery technology. It's going to have a really important place going forward. Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely part of the mix. It's not the full solution, but certainly, and in these areas where you've got the resource, then it's part of the mix. It should be part of the mix. Definitely. Yeah, well, we look forward to catching up soon to hear more about it. Thank you. Cheers, thank you. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in finding out more about how we can create better spaces for wildflowers and create more biodiverse spaces, then check out our episode with John Little, where we talk about just that. If you're interested in finding out more about energy, then make sure to keep an eye on our channels, as we have a really exciting episode coming up where we talk about a range of energy options and the challenges facing some kinds of energy production. Also, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and share this to friends and colleagues. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Beans Accountants, and our kind supporters, Gillian Goodson Design and the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, the incredible Eden Project for having us and allowing us to film there, and of course, NDLA and Monster Don for powering this episode.